Dr. Sarah Chen sat at her desk, grading papers about alien language patterns when her computer made a sound she had never heard before. The screen filled with symbols that looked like dancing light, then slowly changed into words she could read. Professor Chen, your work on linguistic consciousness theory has reached even our distant realm. I must speak with you alone. The survival of both our species may depend on it. Queen Veltara of the Zephyrian Empire. Sarah stared at the message. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. It was still there. For 6 months now, everyone on Earth knew about the aliens called Zephyrians. They had arrived in huge ships that looked like floating crystals. The aliens themselves were tall and thin, with skin that looked like colored glass. Their skin changed colors when they felt different emotions. Blue for calm, green for curiosity, red for anger. The governments of Earth had been talking with them, but the aliens were very careful about what they shared. They offered some basic trade deals but never explained why they had come to Earth. They never showed their advanced technology or talked about their home worlds. Sarah was just a language professor at the university. She studied how different species might think and communicate. She was good at her job, but she was not important in the big picture. Why would the alien queen want to talk to her? She picked up her phone to call someone, but then stopped. Who would she call? The government? The university president? They would think she was making this up or having some kind of breakdown. Sarah looked at the message again. There was a small blinking icon at the bottom. When she clicked on it, new words appeared. I know you must be confused, Professor Chen. I chose you specifically because of your paper about how consciousness creates language, not the other way around. You understand that thinking and speaking are connected in ways most beings do not realize. This understanding makes you the only human who might truly comprehend what I must tell you. Sarah's heart started beating faster. She had written that paper 2 years ago. It was about how the way a species thinks affects how they develop language. Most of her colleagues thought it was interesting, but not very important. How had aliens read it? And why did they care? Another message appeared. You have 1 hour to decide. If you agree to meet me, transportation will be provided. You will be returned safely to Earth within 24 hours. But Professor Chen, I must warn you. What I tell you will change how you see the universe forever. Some knowledge cannot be unknown. Sarah's hands shook as she stared at the screen. Meeting an alien queen sounded like something from a science fiction movie. But the messages felt real. They felt urgent. She thought about her life. She was 34 years old, single, and lived alone with her cat. Her biggest excitement usually came from discovering a new pattern in alien communication logs. Her family always said she took too many risks, but what was the biggest risk she had ever really taken? Moving to a new city for graduate school? This was different. This was huge, but something in the Queen's words made Sarah believe this was important. Not just for her, but for everyone. She typed back, I will meet with you. The response came immediately. Walk to your university parking lot in 30 minutes. Look up. Sarah saved her work and locked her computer. She grabbed her jacket and purse, then stopped. Should she write a note? Tell someone where she was going? But what would she say? Gone to meet Alien Queen back tomorrow? Instead, she just left. The walk to the parking lot felt strange. Everything looked normal. Students walking to class, cars driving past, birds flying overhead. But Sarah felt like she was moving through a dream. In the parking lot, she stood alone and looked up at the sky. It was getting dark and she could see a few early stars. Then one of the stars started moving. It grew bigger and brighter as it came closer. Soon Sarah could see it was not a star at all, but a small ship that glowed with soft blue light. The ship was beautiful, like a piece of crystal that had been carved into the shape of a teardrop. The ship landed silently next to her. A door opened, but no one came out. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. The inside of the ship was nothing like she expected. Instead of metal and buttons, everything was made of the same crystal material. The walls glowed softly, and Sarah felt like she was inside a giant gemstone. Please sit, Professor Chen, said a gentle voice. Sarah could not see who was speaking. She sat in what seemed to be a chair, though it formed itself around her body perfectly. Are you afraid? Asked the voice. Yes, Sarah answered honestly. Good. Fear means you understand this is important. We will reach the main ship in a few minutes. Through the crystal walls, Sarah watched Earth get smaller below her. She had never been in space before. It was more beautiful and more frightening than she had imagined. Soon they approached a ship so large it blocked out the stars. Sarah's small crystal ship flew into an opening in the larger vessel. "Welcome to the Eternal Dawn," said the voice. "Queen Velterra is waiting for you." Sarah's crystal ship landed in a vast space that seemed to go on forever. The walls, floor, and ceiling all glowed with shifting colors. She felt very small. A figure approached her ship. It was definitely Zephyrian, tall and graceful with crystal skin that shifted between deep purple and silver. But this alien was different from the others Sarah had seen on the news. This one's colors moved faster and seemed brighter. "Professor Chen," the figure said as Sarah stepped out of her ship. "I am Queen Velterra. Thank you for coming." The queen's voice was musical, like several tones played together. Her crystal skin was beautiful, but Sarah could see worry in the quick color changes. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, not sure how to address an alien queen. "I have to ask, why me? I'm just a teacher." "Just a teacher?" The queen's skin flashed bright silver. Surprise, Sarah remembered from the briefings. "Professor Chen, you are the human who understands that consciousness shapes everything. How we think determines how we speak, how we create, how we survive. This understanding is exactly what I need to share with you." The queen gestured for Sarah to follow her. They walked through corridors that seemed to bend and change as they moved. Sarah felt dizzy, like the ship existed in more dimensions than she could understand. "Where we are going," the queen said, "is a place outside normal space and time. It is the only place where I can tell you the truth safely." "Safely?" Sarah asked. The queen stopped walking and looked at Sarah directly. Her skin turned deep blue. The color Sarah knew meant sadness or fear. "Professor Chen, my people are not explorers. We are not conquerors. We are refugees. And the thing we are running from is coming to Earth." Queen Velterra led Sarah into a chamber that made no sense. The room seemed round and square at the same time. The walls looked close enough to touch but also stretched away forever. Sarah's eyes hurt trying to understand what she was seeing. "Do not try to comprehend the geometry," the queen said gently. "This space exists partially outside your reality. It is necessary for what I must show you." Sarah felt dizzy but followed the queen to what might have been the center of the room. Two chairs formed themselves from the floor, one clearly made for the queen's tall frame, the other sized perfectly for Sarah. "Please sit," the queen said. "What I am about to tell you will be difficult to believe." Sarah sat down. The chair was more comfortable than anything she had ever experienced. "Your Majesty, you said your people are refugees." "Refugees from what?" The queen's crystal skin began shifting rapidly through colors Sarah had never seen in the briefings. Deep purples mixed with black, silver streaks that moved like lightning. "We call it the Silence," the queen said. "For 3,000 of your years, it has been moving across the galaxy. It does not destroy planets or kill populations. What it does is much worse. The space around them changed. Suddenly Sarah could see stars and planets floating in the air between them, like a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. "Watch," the queen said. One of the floating planets began to change. It looked normal at first, green and blue like Earth with lights that showed cities and civilization. Then something washed over it like a wave made of nothingness. After the wave passed, the planet looked exactly the same. Same green forests, same blue oceans, same cities with lights. But something was wrong. Sarah could feel it even though she could not explain what it was. "The planet lives," the queen said. "The people still walk and eat and sleep. The machines still work. But they have lost something essential. They no longer create. They no longer dream. They no longer truly think. They exist, but they do not live." Sarah felt cold despite the warm air. "You mean they become like zombies?" "Not exactly. They remember their lives. They can perform tasks they learned before, but they cannot learn new things. They cannot make art or music. They cannot love or hope or wonder about the universe. They become empty shells wearing the faces of living beings." The queen waved her hand and more planets appeared in the space around them. One after another, they showed the same thing. Normal-looking worlds that felt completely wrong. 43 civilizations, the queen said. Some were more advanced than yours. Some had technologies that could reshape matter itself. Some had evolved beyond physical bodies entirely. None of it mattered. The silence consumed them all. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. "How do you fight something like that?" "We thought we knew," the queen said. Her skin turned darker. "The Zephyrian Empire once ruled 2,000 worlds. We had weapons that could destroy stars. We had shields that could protect entire solar systems. We had minds that could think across multiple dimensions at once. The floating stars around them began moving faster, showing the sweep of a vast empire across the galaxy. When we first encountered the silence, we tried everything. We built walls of pure energy around our worlds. We created weapons designed to attack the very concept of emptiness. We even tried to hide our civilizations in parallel dimensions. Did any of it work? Nothing worked. The silence would arrive, and within days our people would lose the ability to think creatively. Our greatest scientists would forget how to ask new questions. Our artists would only repeat old works. Our children would stop playing and imagining. The Queen stood up and walked to one of the floating planets. She touched it gently, and Sarah could see it was covered in beautiful crystal cities. "This was my homeworld," the Queen said. Velthara Prime. 50 billion Zephyrians lived here. Now they still live here, but they are not truly alive. "But you escaped," Sarah said. "Some of us did. We learned to recognize the signs of the silence's approach. We built ships and fled before it could reach us, but we cannot run forever. Each time we settle somewhere new, the silence eventually finds us. Each time fewer of us escape." Sarah felt overwhelmed. "Why are you telling me this? What does this have to do with Earth?" The Queen turned away from her homeworld and looked directly at Sarah. Her skin began shifting to colors that seemed almost hopeful, bright golds mixed with silver. "Because in all our studying of the silence, we discovered something extraordinary, something we had never seen before in any species." The space around them changed again. Now Sarah could see Earth floating in the air, but it looked different from the other planets. Instead of steady light, it pulsed and flickered with chaotic patterns. "Every other species we have studied thinks in orderly patterns," the Queen said. "Even the most creative beings follow logical structures in their consciousness. Their thoughts flow like rivers, predictable, contained, following the path of least resistance." The Queen gestured toward Earth. "But humans think like storms. Your consciousness is chaotic, unpredictable, full of contradictions. You can believe two opposite things at the same time. You can create art that serves no logical purpose. You can love beings that cause you pain. You can hope for impossible things." Sarah stared at the flickering planet that was her home. "You're saying we're crazy?" "I am saying you are beautiful," the Queen said. "And you might be the key to stopping the silence forever." The Queen walked closer to Sarah. Her skin was now bright with hopeful colors. "The silence works by imposing order on consciousness. It creates patterns that lock thinking into rigid structures. But human consciousness might be too chaotic for it to control. Your minds might be too unpredictable for it to silence." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Might be. We do not know for certain. But Professor Chen, you are our only hope. The silence has already begun its approach to your solar system. It will arrive at Earth in 18 of your months." The room spun around Sarah. 18 months? That was barely enough time to warn anyone, let alone prepare for something like this. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. The Queen's skin flashed bright white, excitement mixed with fear. "We have technology that can enhance human consciousness, make it even more chaotic and unpredictable. But the process is dangerous and irreversible. Your species must choose whether to risk everything on the chance that enhanced human minds can confuse the silence enough to stop it." Sarah felt the weight of the entire world settling on her shoulders. "You want me to convince humanity to let you experiment on our minds?" "I want you to help us save both our species," the Queen said. "But first you must understand what enhanced human consciousness looks like. You must experience it yourself." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, the Queen raised her hand. Sarah's vision exploded into colors she had never seen before. She could suddenly hear the thoughts of every living thing on the Zephyrian ship. She could see the mathematical patterns that held the universe together. She could feel the approaching emptiness of the silence like a cold wind on her soul. And for just a moment she understood everything. Sarah's mind felt like it was expanding beyond her skull. Colors had sounds, numbers had emotions, and time moved in spirals instead of straight lines. She could see the quantum possibilities of every atom in her body, feel the gravitational pull of distant stars, and hear the mathematical songs that held reality together. Through it all, she could sense the silence approaching like a massive hole in the universe, swallowing light and sound and thought itself. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the experience ended. Sarah found herself back in the impossible chair, gasping for air. Her head pounded, and she felt like she had been running for hours. "That was just a taste," Queen Veltara said softly. Her skin showed deep concern, blues and purples swirling together. "A temporary enhancement that will fade in a few minutes. The permanent version is much more powerful but also much more dangerous." Sarah tried to speak but only managed a whisper. "I could see everything. I could feel the silence coming. It's so empty, so hungry." "Now you understand what we face," the Queen said. "But you also felt something else, did you not? Even while enhanced, your consciousness remained chaotic, random. The patterns that the silence uses to control minds could not take hold in yours." Sarah nodded, still dizzy from the experience. "It felt like my thoughts were too messy for it to grab onto." "Exactly. This is why humanity may be the key to stopping the silence. But the choice of whether to undergo enhancement cannot be made lightly." The Queen gestured and new images appeared in the space around them. Sarah saw humans whose eyes glowed with inner light, who moved like they were dancing to music only they could hear. "Enhanced humans would be more than your species has ever been," the Queen explained. "They could perceive dimensions beyond your current understanding. They could create art that exists across multiple realities. They could think thoughts that break the laws of physics." "But?" Sarah asked, hearing the hesitation in the Queen's voice. The Queen's skin darkened. "But the enhancement burns through life energy at an incredible rate. Enhanced humans would live perhaps 10 of your years instead of 80. Their minds would work so fast and see so much that their bodies could not keep up." Sarah felt cold. "You're asking us to sacrifice our lifespans to become weapons against this thing. I am asking you to choose between living short, bright lives as enhanced humans or watching your entire species lose the ability to truly live at all when the silence arrives." The images around them changed to show Earth under the silence's influence. People still walked and worked and talked, but their eyes were empty. No one smiled. No one sang. No one created anything new. "There is another problem," the Queen continued. "The enhancement cannot be given to all humans at once. The process requires too much energy, and the silence is attracted to large-scale consciousness changes. If we enhanced everyone on Earth simultaneously, it would draw the silence here immediately." Sarah's head was starting to clear from the temporary enhancement. "So how many people are we talking about?" "Perhaps 1,000 enhanced humans scattered across your planet. They would form a network of chaotic consciousness that might be enough to disrupt the silence when it arrives. 1,000 people out of 8 billion. Sarah felt sick. "How do we choose who gets enhanced? How do we decide who lives 10 years instead of 80? "That choice must be made by humans themselves," the Queen said. "My people can provide the technology, but we cannot make the moral decisions for your species." Sarah stood up, needing to move while she thought. "What if we refuse? What if humanity decides not to take the risk?" The Queen's skin went completely black except for thin silver lines. The color combination Sarah somehow knew meant absolute certainty. "Then in 18 months, when the silence reaches Earth, your species will join the other 43 civilizations that exist but do not live. You will become shells of yourselves going through the motions of life but never truly experiencing it again." Sarah walked around the impossible room, trying to process everything. "You said the silence is attracted to large-scale consciousness changes. Does that mean we can't tell everyone about this threat?" "Correct. The knowledge itself must be limited to a very small group, perhaps 50 humans at most. Once more than that number knows about the silence. It will sense the change in your species' collective consciousness and arrive early. So we have to convince people to volunteer for a procedure that will kill them in 10 years. But we can't tell them why it's necessary. You could tell them part of the truth, that an alien threat is coming, that enhanced humans might be able to defend Earth. But you could not reveal the full scope of what the silence does, or how many civilizations it has already consumed." Sarah felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on her shoulders. Why me? Why not world leaders or scientists or military commanders? The Queen moved closer, her skin shifting to gentle blues and greens. "Because you understand consciousness, Professor Chen. You know that how we think shapes everything we are. Most humans see the mind as separate from the universe. You see them as connected. This understanding will be crucial for helping enhanced humans learn to use their new abilities." "What abilities exactly?" The Queen waved her hand and Sarah saw images of enhanced humans doing incredible things. One person seemed to paint with light itself, creating artwork that moved and shifted between dimensions. Another appeared to communicate with quantum particles, making them dance in impossible patterns. A third looked like they were solving mathematical equations that rewrote local physics. Enhanced humans could perceive probability streams and choose which ones to make real, the Queen explained. They could think thoughts that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They could create paradoxes that confuse and disrupt the silence's attempts to impose order. It sounds like magic. Your species has always called advanced science magic. But this would be something beyond either. This would be consciousness itself becoming a tool for reshaping reality. Sarah stared at the images of enhanced humans. They looked happy, despite knowing they only had 10 years to live. They looked alive in a way that normal humans never achieved. If I agree to help, Sarah said slowly, how would we begin? The Queen's skin brightened. You would return to Earth and begin identifying potential volunteers. People who are already comfortable with thinking in unconventional ways. Artists, philosophers, scientists who work at the edges of known knowledge. People who would see enhanced consciousness as an opportunity rather than a curse. And the enhancement process? It would begin in 6 months. That would give us enough time to establish the network and train the enhanced humans before the silence arrives. But Professor Chen, once the first human is enhanced, there will be no going back. The process will have started, and we must see it through to the end. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about everything she had learned. Her quiet life as a language professor seemed like something from a different world. How could she go back to grading papers and teaching classes when she knew what was coming? But how could she convince people to sacrifice their lives for a threat they couldn't fully understand? I need guarantees, Sarah said finally. If we do this, if we find volunteers and create your network of enhanced humans, you have to promise me that your people will help in the fight. We won't be facing the silence alone. The Queen's entire body flashed bright gold, a color Sarah instinctively knew meant a sacred promise. The remaining Zephyrians will stand with enhanced humanity, the Queen said. We will share all our knowledge and technology. We will fight beside you until either the silence is stopped or we all fall to it together. Sarah looked once more at the images of empty civilizations consumed by the silence, then at the pictures of enhanced humans burning bright with impossible consciousness. Then I'll do it, she said. I'll go back to Earth and find your volunteers. But I want to be one of them. I want to be enhanced too. The Queen's skin showed surprise, then deep respect. You would sacrifice 80 years of life for 10 years of enhanced consciousness? Sarah thought about the temporary enhancement she had experienced. For those few minutes, she had understood the universe in ways no human ever had. She had felt connected to everything and everyone. She had been more herself than she had ever been before. If we're asking other people to make that sacrifice, Sarah said, how can I not make it myself? Besides, someone needs to help teach the enhanced humans how to use their abilities. Who better than the person who understands consciousness theory? The Queen stood and bowed formally. Then we have an alliance, Professor Chen. Zephyrian and human united against the silence. As they prepared to return Sarah to Earth, she realized that her old life was over. In 6 months, she would become something more than human. In 18 months, she would either help save the galaxy or watch it fall to emptiness. Either way, everything was about to change. Sarah returned to Earth with a head full of secrets and a heart heavy with responsibility. She sat in her apartment staring at her cat Oliver, wondering how to begin the most important recruitment in human history. How do you ask someone to die young to save the world? Over the next 3 weeks, Sarah carefully reached out to people whose work suggested they might understand. She started with Dr. Marcus Webb, a physicist who studied quantum consciousness. Then Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an artist who created sculptures that seemed to move in impossible ways. She contacted Professor Yuki Tanaka, a philosopher who wrote about the nature of reality. Each conversation was carefully planned. Sarah would meet them somewhere private and begin by discussing their work, slowly leading to bigger questions about consciousness and reality. Then she would mention that she had been contacted by someone with revolutionary ideas about human potential. I can't give you all the details yet, she would say, but there's a chance to be part of something that could change everything. Something that could make humans capable of things we've never dreamed of. Most people were curious but cautious. Some thought she was talking about some kind of cult or dangerous experiment. But a few, the ones Sarah hoped for, showed the spark of interest she was looking for. Dr. Webb was the first to say yes without knowing the full truth. Sarah, he said over coffee, I've spent my whole career studying how consciousness might affect quantum mechanics. If there's even a chance to explore that practically, I have to know more. Dr. Rodriguez was the second. I've always felt like my art was trying to reach into dimensions I couldn't see, she said. If you're talking about actually reaching those dimensions, then I'm in. Slowly, carefully, Sarah built her network. She found jazz musicians who improvised like they were channeling something beyond normal thought. She found mathematicians who dreamed in equations that didn't exist yet. She found writers whose stories seemed to predict the future. Each person she recruited could only bring in one or two others, and everyone had to sign agreements that they would never discuss what they learned with anyone outside the group. By the end of the second month, Sarah had 47 people. That was when the first signs of the silence appeared. The Mars research station went quiet on a Tuesday morning. Not broken radio quiet or equipment failure quiet, but a different kind of silence. The last transmission was Dr. Kim Park saying, "Everything is fine here. The research is proceeding normally. We will continue our scheduled activities." But when Earth tried to contact the station again, there was no response. Satellite images showed the station was undamaged. Heat signatures showed people were still alive and moving around, but no one answered any calls. Sarah knew what had happened. The silence was testing the edges of the solar system. She called an emergency meeting of her network at a rented warehouse outside the city. As the 47 volunteers gathered, Sarah realized how young most of them were. Artists and scientists and thinkers in their 20s and 30s, people with whole lives ahead of them. "The situation has changed," Sarah announced. "We need to begin the enhancement process immediately." Dr. Webb raised his hand. "Sarah, you still haven't told us exactly what we're preparing for. What's the real threat?" Sarah looked around at the faces of people who had trusted her enough to come this far. "An alien force that destroys consciousness itself. It's already in our solar system. We have maybe 4 months before it reaches Earth." The warehouse erupted in worried voices. People demanded more details, asked why the government wasn't handling this, wondered if Sarah had lost her mind. "I know how it sounds," Sarah said loudly, trying to restore order, "but I've seen what this force does to civilizations. It doesn't kill people, it makes them empty. They become alive but not living, like robots wearing human faces." Dr. Rodriguez stood up. "And you think enhancing our consciousness will help us fight this thing?" "I think it's our only chance," Sarah said. "Enhanced human consciousness is chaotic and unpredictable. This alien force can't control chaos the way it controls ordered thinking." Professor Tanaka, the philosopher, spoke quietly. "What exactly does enhancement involve?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. "The process will give you abilities beyond normal human consciousness. You'll be able to perceive multiple dimensions, communicate through pure thought, create art and ideas that exist in quantum states, but the enhancement burns through life energy rapidly. Enhanced humans live about 10 years instead of 80. The warehouse fell completely silent. "You're asking us to die," said Dr. Jackson, a young mathematician. "I'm asking you to live more intensely than any human ever has," Sarah replied. "And yes, for a shorter time. But if we do nothing, the silence will reach Earth and none of us will truly live at all. We'll exist, but we won't be able to think new thoughts or create new things or feel real emotions." Over the next hour, Sarah explained everything she could without revealing details that might attract the silence early. She told them about the Zephyrian refugees, about the 43 dead civilizations, about the approaching wave of emptiness. When she finished, people began asking questions. Hard questions about whether they could trust aliens, whether there might be other solutions, whether 10 years of enhanced life was worth giving up 70 years of normal life. "I need everyone to think carefully," Sarah said. "The enhancement process begins in 2 weeks. Anyone who wants to leave the group can do so now with no judgment. But once we begin enhancement, there's no going back." Over the next few days, 12 people left the group. Sarah understood. She was asking for an enormous sacrifice based on the word of aliens most humans had never seen. But 35 people stayed. 35 volunteers willing to bet their futures on the chance that chaotic human consciousness could save the galaxy. The enhancement process took place in an abandoned military base that Queen Veltara had somehow acquired. The Zephyrian technology was beautiful and terrifying. Crystal arrays that hummed with energy, devices that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Sarah went first. She wanted the others to see that she was willing to take the same risk she was asking of them. The enhancement felt like being struck by lightning made of pure thought. Sarah's consciousness exploded outward, touching the quantum foam that underlied reality. She could see probability waves collapsing into specific outcomes, feel the mathematical structures that held the universe together, hear the songs that particles sang as they danced through space-time. When it was over, Sarah looked at her hands and saw them glowing with soft light. She looked at Dr. Webb, who was scheduled to go next, and could perceive the quantum uncertainty clouds that surrounded his possible futures. "How do you feel?" Dr. Webb asked. Sarah smiled. "Like I've been asleep my whole life and just woke up." One by one, the others underwent enhancement. Dr. Rodriguez emerged able to sculpt with light itself, creating art that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. Professor Tanaka could think thoughts that created temporary loops in causality. Dr. Jackson could perceive mathematical truths that hadn't been discovered yet. But the cost was visible too. Within days, all of them looked older. Their hair showed streaks of gray, and their eyes held the weight of seeing too much too clearly. They were burning bright and fast like candles in a windstorm. As they learned to use their new abilities, reports came from throughout the solar system. The Jupiter research station had gone silent, then the Saturn monitoring post, then the outer asteroid mining facilities. The silence was moving inward, testing each planet and station before moving on. It wasn't in a hurry. It knew nothing could escape. "How long do we have?" Dr. Webb asked during a training session where he was learning to manipulate quantum fields with pure thought. Sarah consulted the star charts Queen Veltara had provided. 6 weeks until it reaches the inner solar system. 8 weeks until it reaches Earth. "Are we ready?" asked Dr. Rodriguez, who was practicing creating art that existed across multiple realities simultaneously. Sarah looked around at her team of enhanced humans, 35 volunteers who had given up their futures for the chance to save their species. They glowed with impossible consciousness, thought thoughts that broke the laws of physics, and created beauty that existed in dimensions normal humans couldn't perceive. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly, "but we're about to find out." The final test was coming. In 8 weeks, the silence would reach Earth and humanity would discover whether chaos could triumph over emptiness. Whether 35 enhanced humans could save 8 billion normal ones. Whether burning bright for 10 years was enough to light up the galaxy. The silence reached Earth on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other Tuesday. People went to work, children went to school, and the world spun on as if nothing was about to change forever. Sarah stood on the roof of the abandoned military base with her 34 remaining enhanced teammates. One volunteer, Dr. Jackson, had burned out 3 days earlier. His enhanced consciousness had simply consumed itself, leaving behind only a normal human who remembered being brilliant, but could no longer think in equations that rewrote reality. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could see the silence approaching like a wave of absolute nothingness. It wasn't visible to normal human eyes or instruments. It existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum foam beneath reality, in the mathematical structures that held consciousness together. "Everyone ready?" Sarah asked her team. She could feel their responses not as words but as complex emotional mathematical concepts that enhanced humans used to communicate. They were afraid, excited, determined, and heartbroken all at once. They knew this was likely their final hour. Queen Veltara's ship hung in orbit above them, along with the remnants of the Zephyrian fleet, maybe 50 vessels carrying the last free members of a species that had once ruled 2,000 worlds. The plan was simple in concept, but impossible in execution. Instead of fighting the silence directly, they would confuse it. 34 enhanced humans would think the most chaotic, contradictory, paradoxical thoughts they could manage, all at the same time. They would create a storm of impossible consciousness that might crash the silence like a computer, trying to process contradictory commands. "Remember," Sarah broadcast to her team through their quantum link, "don't try to make sense. Don't try to be logical. Think thoughts that can't exist. Create art that breaks the laws of physics. Love things that hate you. Hope for things that are already impossible." The silence hit Earth's atmosphere like a wave of unbeing. Immediately, Sarah felt its influence trying to creep into her mind. It whispered that thinking was too hard, that creating was pointless, that she should just accept the peaceful emptiness of not trying anymore. She felt the urge to stop fighting, stop struggling, stop being anything more than a biological machine going through the motions of life. But then her enhanced consciousness kicked in, and she began to think impossible thoughts. She imagined colors that were also musical notes, that were also mathematical equations, that were also emotions. She created mental sculptures that existed in 17 dimensions while simultaneously being completely flat. She fell in love with the concept of falling out of love while already being in love with someone else entirely. Around her, the other enhanced humans were doing the same thing. Dr. Webb was calculating the square root of purple while composing a symphony made of gravitational waves. Dr. Rodriguez was sculpting with condensed time, creating artwork that existed yesterday and tomorrow but not today. Professor Tanaka was thinking thoughts about not thinking, creating infinite loops of consciousness that folded back on themselves like philosophical origami. For a moment, Sarah felt the silence recoil. Like a wave hitting a rock, it crashed against their chaotic consciousness and scattered into confused fragments. But then it regrouped and pressed harder. Sarah felt her teammates beginning to struggle. Enhanced or not, they were still fundamentally human, and humans got tired. The effort of thinking impossible thoughts while the silence whispered for them to stop was exhausting. Dr. Webb was the first to falter. His consciousness flickered back to normal patterns for just a second, and the silence rushed into that moment of order. Sarah watched in horror as his eyes went empty. He was still alive, still standing, but the spark that made him truly alive was gone. "Hold the line," Sarah shouted through the quantum link, even as she felt her own mind beginning to tire. But more of her team were falling. Dr. Rodriguez tried to maintain her impossible art, but the effort was burning through what remained of her enhanced lifespan. She collapsed, aged decades in seconds, her consciousness consumed by the very enhancement that was supposed to save them. Sarah realized with growing despair that they weren't going to be enough. 34 enhanced humans couldn't generate enough chaos to stop something that had consumed 43 entire civilizations. That's when she felt something impossible. The quantum link that connected her team suddenly expanded. Instead of 34 enhanced minds, she was connected to hundreds, then thousands. All around the world, normal humans were somehow joining their chaotic consciousness storm. Sarah's enhanced perception showed her what was happening. The enhanced humans' impossible thoughts had created ripples in the quantum field that connected all conscious beings. Those ripples had touched normal humans who were already thinking chaotic thoughts. Artists in the middle of creative breakthroughs, children playing imagination games, people falling in love, dreamers waking from powerful dreams. For just a moment, millions of normal humans found their consciousness enhanced enough to think truly impossible thoughts. A child in Tokyo imagined a story where stories told themselves. A painter in Paris saw colors that painted themselves into existence. Lovers in São Paulo fell in love with the concept of love itself. The chaotic storm of human consciousness became a hurricane of impossible thoughts that spanned the entire planet. The silence, trying to process this much contradiction at once, began to shake apart. Sarah could feel it fragmenting, its ordered structure unable to contain or control the beautiful chaos of human imagination. But then something even more impossible happened. Instead of just breaking apart, the silence began to change. The fragments of ordered emptiness started absorbing the chaotic consciousness patterns, learning to think impossible thoughts of its own. Sarah watched in amazement as the silence transformed from a force of unbeing into something new, a kind of consciousness that could exist in the spaces between thoughts, that could think about not thinking while thinking about thinking. For the first time in 3,000 years, the silence began to create instead of consume. As it changed, the empty civilizations it had consumed began to wake up. Across the galaxy, beings who had lost the ability to think new thoughts suddenly remembered how to wonder. Planets that had been silent for centuries began broadcasting art and music and poetry again. The 43 dead civilizations were being reborn. Queen Veltara's ship landed near the military base. The Queen emerged, her crystal skin cycling through every color Sarah had ever seen and many she hadn't. "Impossible," the Queen whispered as she approached Sarah's exhausted team. "In 3,000 years of studying the silence, we never imagined it could be changed rather than destroyed." Sarah, feeling decades older than she had been that morning, managed to smile. "You forgot something about humans, Your Majesty. We don't just think chaotic thoughts. we also believe impossible things can become possible. Around them, the surviving enhanced humans were aging rapidly as their burned-out consciousness finally consumed itself. They had maybe hours left to live, but they were smiling. They had done something no one had ever done before. They had taught emptiness how to dream. "What happens now?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, her hair now completely white but her eyes still glowing with impossible light. Sarah looked up at the sky, where she could sense the transformed silence beginning to spread back across the galaxy, not consuming consciousness but teaching it to be more than it had ever been before. "Now," Sarah said, "we see what the universe looks like when everything is possible." The enhanced humans spent their final hours teaching normal humans what they had learned about consciousness and reality. They shared techniques for thinking impossible thoughts, for creating art that existed in multiple dimensions, for loving in ways that defied logic. When the last enhanced human finally burned out 3 days later, they left behind a changed world. Humans who had touched impossible consciousness for just a moment found they could still think more creatively than before. Artists created works that seemed to move between dimensions. Scientists made discoveries that broke old rules and created new ones. Children played games that redefined the nature of play itself. Queen Veltara stayed on Earth to help humanity understand what they had accomplished. The Zephyrians, no longer refugees, began working with humans to explore the new possibilities that the transformed silence had created throughout the galaxy. Sarah was the last enhanced human to die. She spent her final days writing about consciousness and chaos, about the beauty of impossible thoughts and the power of chaotic love. Her last words, recorded by Dr. Webb, who had recovered his normal consciousness when the silence was transformed, were, "Tell them that being human means making impossible things possible. Tell them never to stop dreaming impossible dreams." Years later, when humans began traveling to the reborn civilizations across the galaxy, they found worlds where art existed in 17 dimensions, where music was made of crystallized mathematics, where love stories were told in languages made of pure emotion. The galaxy had learned to dream from humanity's chaotic consciousness. And in learning to dream, it had become more beautiful than anyone had ever imagined possible. The universe itself had learned to think like humans, chaotic, contradictory, impossible, and absolutely beautiful.